Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another guest to reintroduce to you now. Dr. Bill Schindler is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his appearance on Boundless Body Radio on episode 14. Dr. Schindler is an archeologist who has traveled to every corner of the globe to learn about our human roots. In his travels, Dr. Schindler learned that our current industrialized food system is vastly different than what we have eaten as a species for millions of years. He and his family, nicknamed the Modern Stone Age family, strive to eat and live the way our ancestors did, all while dealing with our modern lives. His much-anticipated book, Eat Like a Human, was published in 2021. His goal is to help readers find food that is as nutrient-dense as possible, and to prepare that food using methods to release those nutrients and make them safe and bioavailable to our bodies, which is exactly what allowed our ancestors to not only live, but thrive. Dr. Bill Schindler, what a pleasure it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's such an honor. I have to tell you, when we were first getting started, we had very few downloads. I was reaching out to some of my heroes to see what they would want to be on our show, and you were one of the very first ones that we reached out to. And I will never forget sending you an email to ask if you would like to be on our show. And you said, Casey, I would love to be on your show. And that meant so much to me. And just to have you back on to tell you thank you so much for your enthusiasm and being willing to share your message on our show, it just means the world to me. So thank you so very much.
Man, that is great to hear. Thank you. Thank you. I love what you're doing, and I love to support it any way I can.
Well, it was very meaningful to have you on and host you. Man, it's such a cool journey that you've been on. We talked last year about all kinds of stuff, and now you have a book out. So tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure. So this book is a culmination of, well, in many ways, a lifetime worth of work, but definitely the past 10 years, we hit it really, really hard. And I say I know my name is on the book, but this has been, as you mentioned in the introduction, a full family adventure. I have, we talked a little bit about this last time, but I've been on a lifelong journey to try to figure out how I could feed my body the most nourishing food possible and how to live my best life, as I'm sure everybody listening has. And when I started to have a family, when I got married to my wife, Christina, and we started to have kids, it really, the focus shifted from me to them. And it became incredibly important. How do I nourish this family and feed them the food they should be eating so they can live their best lives? And, I don't want to even pretend that my wife and I have figured it out. I will say I think we're at least asking the right questions, which is a huge step forward. And we have figured out a whole bunch of things that have worked on this journey that we're on. And I say it's a journey because it's a never-ending journey, and it should always be a journey. And what we wanted to do with this book is to share what we've learned in trying to achieve that goal with the world. And I hope it can at least inspire, if not help, not direct isn't the right word, guide towards cooking the healthiest way possible in our own home so we can feed ourselves and our family the most nourishing foods possible. And it is a combination. I am an archaeologist and anthropologist by training, and I've spent my whole life engaged in that sort of work. And more recently, I've become trained as a chef, and I'm now working at some levels. I'm sure we'll talk about it as a chef now. And it's really bringing all of those things together in the most accessible, meaningful, and relevant way possible to achieve this thing we're all searching, this health. And that's what the book is all about.
I love that. You mentioned your kiddos. I'm wondering if you've noticed a difference in, their upbringing and the things that they've been able to experience by eating differently than maybe you or I have growing up.
Oh, 100%. I was born in 1973, and the war on fat, on saturated fat, was in full force then. And if you were a good parent in the 1970s, you didn't feed your kids certainly not lard or tallow, but my gosh, not even real butter. You were serving them margarine and ultra pasteurized skim milk and all these other crazy things. And it certainly shaped my worldview on food, diet, and health for decades. And my kids don't, and I was scared. I mean, I was truly scared of putting any bit of, I'd cut the fat off my steak and do all those, maybe if I had a piece of toast when I was a kid, I'd like the smallest amount, a glisten of butter, and that was it. Anything beyond that, I thought I was, done for the day. And that's not the way, obviously, my kids look at this. In fact, we don't track our food really anyhow. We're just trying to eat as healthy as possible. But We don't track calories, protein, fat, those sorts of things. We look at food, and I hope they see food. They don't just see a whole bunch of numbers. When I was a kid, when I looked at a plate of food, what I saw in my head were numbers. This many calories, this much fat, this much protein, this much this, and this. And I hope, and I'm confident when they look at food, they see food the way our ancestors and even our grandparents did. And they're not scared of fat. They're scared of the wrong fats. They're scared of, industrial nut and seed oils. But with when they see fat, it's something I'm hoping, and I think they cherish and they relish. And I think one other important point too, one of the things that I'm really fighting hard to bring back into our foodways is modern foodways is a nose to tail approach to animals. And I think that really begins with understanding that what you're looking at on your plate was a culmination of the life of an animal, the death of an animal, and all the work that whoever prepared that food for you went through to feed you and to nourish you. And I'm hoping when they see a piece of meat on a plate, they're actually not only not thinking about fats and proteins and all those sorts of things, and not only not scared of the fat that's on that meat, but also thinking about the animal that meat came from, and not just looking at a chicken breast or a sirloin or a loin or something as just a piece of meat. So those are probably the three biggest things that I'm hoping, and I think my kids look at and see when they look at food that's different than how I did when I was a kid.
What a gift. That's so cool. I totally can still taste Bisquick pancakes with Spam. And I can't believe it's not butter, and the syrup that we would use. Like, that was just normal Saturday morning for us. That's crazy.
Do you remember the South Beach? Did you ever do the South Beach diet?
Thankfully, no, but I do remember it. Yes.
Okay. So one of the things on the South Beach diet was they loved, I can't believe it's not butter, which obviously came in a spritz bottle, because the idea was you were just supposed to spritz it. But a little bit of it's bad, a whole lot of it is terrible. But they had a recipe on there. Oh gosh, I remember we used to make it. I cringe. It was a mashed cauliflower thing. It was supposed to resemble mashed potatoes, and they would dump like a bottle of I can't believe it's not butter in there for one, 4 servings worth of it. Oh my God, I can't believe I ate that.
That's crazy. I can still taste some of that stuff. So for most people, I don't even think they consider when they walk into a grocery store and buy an apple, like 365 days out of the year. Like, I don't even think they have that level of awareness of where their food is coming from. So when you try to bring this concept, eat like a human, into people's, consciousness, what are the main parts of your message that you try to tell people who might not have this on their radar?
Sure. So the main thing is this, and I'll get into the ingredients themselves, things like an apple or whatever that resource is in just a second. But let me just say this. I've spent my entire life, and I know we talked about this a little bit the last time we spoke, but I think it's really important. It's the foundation of this book and all the work that I'm doing now, and the foundation of how I'm nourishing myself and my family, and now with what my wife and I are doing in the community. I've been searching my whole life to answer this question, what I should be eating. And I think that's where most of us looking to get healthy put all of our effort. What is it? What kind of grains am I eating? What kind of milk am I drinking? What kind of meat am I getting? Where am I sourcing it from? And all those things are incredibly important. And I don't want to understate that. But what I do want to say is, for humans, that's only half the equation. We have one of the least efficient digestive tracts of any animal on the planet. And it's a huge conversation. I dive into it in depth in the book, but the reality is we are not physically designed to eat most of the foods that we consume today, and even in the past. And it's really odd to say that. Wow, what do you mean? We eat all these foods. We've been eating them for hundreds of years, or thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years. Aren't humans omnivores? Well, yes, humans are omnivores, but not by design. Not because we were designed to consume all these foods that we eat, right? We don't have a digestive tract like a cow that is specifically set up to properly digest efficiently and safely tough vegetable materials. We don't have a digestive tract like a goose or a duck or another granivorous bird that's specifically designed to safely and efficiently get the nutrition from things like grains. We don't have any of those things. So, but we are omnivores. How can that be? And we're omnivores by technology, because over millions of years, our ancestors created technologies and behaviors and approaches to food to transform it before it touches our lips, to literally get it ready for our incredibly weak and inefficient digestive tract to safely and efficiently make use of that food. That's the key. That's what humans do differently than all other animals, that we process the food when we do it right, properly, before it touches our lips. So, and most of the technologies created over really, and I'm not overstating this at all, almost 3.5 million years, beginning with the first stone tool, these technologies were designed to take a resource that in many cases we have no business consuming, make it safe, make it nutrient dense, and most importantly, make it bioavailable. In other words, make those nutrients available to our digestive tract. So when we consume that food, we're getting the nutrition going to the places it needs to go in our bodies. That's the key. And that's the how part. So that we've been asking this question, what, which is important, which is the same question you just asked me, like, what about the apple? What apples? That's important. And we'll talk about that in a second. But what's really also important to comprehend is that when we do it right, we use technologies to transform those resources into their safest and most nourishing forms possible before we consume them and get them ready for our bodies. That's the cooking piece of it, whether it's cooking or fermenting or slicing or dicing or nixtamalizing or co-eating with different things. That's the thing that we need to bring back into our kitchen. Because I said in the past 5 minutes the word processing probably a dozen times. And most of us, when we think about food processing, like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And it is. The way the modern food industry processes food today, most of it is terrible. Most of it is at the expense of safety and nutrient density and nutrient bioavailability. And at its ultimate end result is it's at the expense of our own health. But what it's doing is making other people a whole lot of money, right? But the food processing we need to get back is to make food safe and nourishing as possible. So that's the foundation of it. And the cool thing is all of this is doable in your home kitchen. It doesn't matter if you live in a tiny little flat in New York City or a mansion on top of a mountain in Montana with the most well-outfitted kitchen on the planet. You have all the things you need to process that food properly. Now, our ancestors are doing it in caves with sticks and rocks and fire and clay pots. We certainly have the things that we need to have already. So as far that how piece is incredibly important. The what piece also is important, and there is a little bit of overlap. So you mentioned the apples, 365 days a year. Well, we think of that as the ability to take produce and make it available all year round as this wonderful thing and this result of modern technology and transportation and shipping and refrigeration and freezing and all that. And the reality is we have never, ever in the history of our species had access to the same vegetable or fruit all year round. It's impossible. And when we come from the mindset that the most nourishing things we can be eating is fruits and vegetables, which is not true. But if that was true, it just follows, the thinking follows is, wow, if some of this is good, more of it's better. So if I can get it 2 weeks out of the year naturally, then if I can get it 365 days a year, because I can get it shipped in from Argentina and Peru and wherever else, and I can have it frozen, then that's even better. But when you dive into it and look more deeply and you understand that, no, we've actually been eating seasonally for millions of years. In fact, hyper seasonally and hyper local for a very long period of time, and we start to realize that while plants have nutrition that is valuable, plants are inherently dangerous, right? And we can talk about this in just a few minutes, but what I mention it now to say, one of the issues that we've caused by making fruits and vegetables the same ones available all year round is we have created a danger in our food system that we're just starting to now realize. We're taking plants, and I'll bring up spinach as an example, plants that have certain toxins in them. In the case of spinach, it's incredibly high in oxalates, that if you ate spinach for the 2 weeks out of the year that it would grow in your area out in a field, then no big deal. But if you take that and eat it literally every single day or every single week, all year round, you're starting to create the toxicity level is going to build up in your bodies, and it's going to cause all sorts of issues. And we're starting to actually realize that today.
Spinach. You're talking about what everybody would ubiquitously consider a healthy food. And we were fortunate enough to have Sally Norton on, and she's obviously an expert in oxalate. And it's absolutely bananas. And people don't consider that seasonality. I've heard you talk about this before, and you've said that plants should scare the hell out of you. What do you mean by that?
That's the opening line of my chapter on plants in the book. Listen, first of all, I just got to say, Sally Norton is fantastic. And I will give her, I will always give her an amazing amount of credit. One conversation with her about oxalates a couple of years ago literally changed my life. She is, with the work she's doing, is literally that powerful. Thankfully, she's coming out with a book, and it should be available in just a couple months. And it's going to change lives. So here's the story with plants. First off, we have taken away seasonality in our grocery stores. And the more removed we are from our food system and the longer our food chain is, right? And the more distance we are from our food, the less we have direct access to the knowledge about our food, where it comes from, how it should be prepared, what nourishing forms of it actually are. And the more we start to rely on other people who, some of them certainly have our best interest or our interest at heart, but most of them are trying to make money. And giving up the power of food and nourishment to somebody else is incredibly dangerous. And there's direct marketing campaigns and people in lab coats playing with flavor profiles of food that are there to trick us and make us buy more food and overeat and do all these other sorts of things. And we know this. But one thing that's also a little bit less in your face, but probably even more powerful, is literally what is in the grocery stores. What we see in the grocery stores are subliminal messages to tell us what food is and what food isn't, right? If we were hunter-gatherers and we're out there foraging and hunting every day, and we see the seasons change and we see the animals migrate in and we see this is available then and this plant is not available at this point, it's just, we would naturally recognize this is food, this isn't food. This is food this time of year, this isn't food that time of year because I can't get it at all. But when we go into the grocery store and we see asparagus all year round, and we see apples all year round, and every one of them looks exactly the same, and the eggs are exactly the same size, and then we see chicken breast here, and there's a ton of chicken breast over here, there's a few thighs, and maybe there's a container stuck in the back that has some livers in it, but probably if you see livers in your grocery store, most of the time it's in the bait section for the food. It really, that experience right there shapes how you envision, your foodscape, what you have access to, what food is and what food isn't. Right then and there, you don't see any chicken skin, you don't see any chicken hearts, you don't see any chicken gizzards, you don't see any bones, you don't see any feet, you don't see, misshapen apples, you do see asparagus all year round. You don't see an empty slot where the asparagus is when it's not in season. All of that are, powerful subliminal messages that shape the way you view your food and what a healthy diet should and shouldn't be. So that's really, really problematic. So I say the plants should scare the hell out of you because here we're coming in as really uninformed consumers, right? Because our information is coming from the people trying to sell us the food, which is problematic. The people that are stocking the grocery store or deciding where things are stocked in the grocery store, and we're really at a loss from the first moment. We walk into the grocery store, I think many of us, and I know I used to do this, with this idea that plants are incredibly healthy, and you push your shopping cart into the produce section. You say, "Oh my gosh, if I'm going to get this is the week I'm going to get healthy. This is the week I'm going to make my family healthy." And you look around in the produce section, you're like, "Some of this is good. Everybody tells me that this is all good. So if some of it's good, more of it's even better." And you do one of the most dangerous things when you're deciding how to feed yourself and your family, and you shut your brain off, you shut your filters off, and you just start loading the cart with all kinds of vegetables. And then maybe you move on and get a couple other things. The problem is all plants are toxic, all of them. Every plant on this planet is toxic. And the reason is because plants are trying to do exactly what every other living thing on this planet needs to do to survive: reproduce viable offspring. Now, animals have a lot of ways to defend themselves and make sure that their offspring are viable and can reproduce and are safe and all that. They have claws and teeth, and skunks have smells, and also they can fly. They can do all sorts of things. Plants can't move. Like plants they don't move. So there are some physical defense mechanisms from plants, things like thorns and hard shells on nuts and bark on trees and those sorts of things for sure. But the reality is all plants are engaging in chemical warfare to survive, reproduce viable offspring so they make sure they don't go extinct. Now, some of these toxins are benign. Like they don't do, they're at such low levels, they don't do a whole lot. We don't have to really worry about them. Some of them, like toxins in certain mushrooms, for example, will kill you outright. But most of these toxins, and the ones that we really need to be afraid of, are there and can build up in our bodies over time. And they don't, and they can cause a lot of problems later on, or they cause little tiny problems here and there for a very long period of time until we get hit with it full blown. And the problem with that kind of toxin in plants is that we don't associate it. There's such a distance between the consumption of that plant and the problem associated with it, or it's happening at such a low level for so long that we don't associate the two of those things together. I mean, if we ate a mushroom and was violently ill the next day, then we know, hey, that mushroom made me really sick. But if we're eating spinach, and then we're eating spinach, and then we're eating spinach, and then several months later, we're getting out of bed and, our knees are achy and our feet are, our feet hurt and you're a little bit creaky going up the steps and you're 40 years old. And like, oh, this is just old age. We've kind of normalized these things. You don't associate it, especially because the media is telling us that spinach is amazing for us. I have no idea why we were listening to a cartoon from 50 years ago tell us that spinach was, but we've bought into this. And then we can have all sorts of these issues. So the cool thing or cool isn't the right word, powerful thing about being a hunter-gatherer, right? Hunter-gatherer ancestors is that they realized that these plants, because they were dealing with them all the time, these plants had toxins in them. And in many cases, they've figured out technologies and approaches to those toxic foods to detoxify them and make them safer to eat. Other ones they just knew to stay away from. Other ones they realized that by default, they didn't even realize that they only had access to it seasonally, right? And all of these, this is what a close connection to your food system can provide you. But now with us going in thinking all vegetables and fruits are incredibly healthy, they're great for you, eat them all year round. Things we've labeled foods as superfoods, which drives me nuts. Spinach being one of them. Eat some of them, eat a ton of them. Everything's going to be fine. And then we have a huge issue with it. With the reality is, we need to be scared and respectful of plants. We need to realize that when we consume plants, there are plants that have good nutrition for us, but it always comes at a little bit of a cost. Now, maybe the nutrition or the pleasure we get from eating that outweighs the cost of eating that, whether we're taking in some oxalates or some lectins or some phytates or whatever it is that the problem that plant has. It may outweigh it, but it requires our thinking to decide whether or not it makes sense to eat that. What part of the year should I be eating it? How much should I be consuming of it? And most importantly, what can I do to that plant to make it as safe and nourishing as possible before me or my family eats it? And I know this sounds overwhelming to some people, like, oh my God, this is one more thing for me to think about. And it is, and that's good. I mean, we are sicker than we've ever been as a species right now because of the way we feed ourselves. We can crawl out of this hole, but it takes vigilance. It takes time. It takes work and effort. But I'm telling you, it is such a rewarding journey when you start to feel better. I'm 48 years old. I was a Division I athlete at Ohio State. I wrestled there, and I am 48 years old now, and I'm in the best health of my entire life. I don't care what age you are. It is worth paying attention and taking these steps because it will pay off in droves.
I love that. That's amazing. And keep in mind, like, we're talking about like fruits and vegetables. These are things that everybody, like you said, considers healthy. This says nothing about the double line of cars wrapping around McDonald's every afternoon near my house, or the soda shop where you can buy a bucket of soda for $5. Like, we're really screwed when we start to talk about like some of the industrial, food systems out there and how bad that kind of food is.
Oh, 100%. I guess the new one now is Chick-fil-A. I mean, they have like double. I've seen the Chick-fil-A's with 2 or 3 lanes for the drive-through next to each other. It is truly unbelievable. And then we wonder why we're in the health state that we're in now. But and again, I know that sounds overwhelming because somebody might sit there and say, "Oh my gosh, like, are you kidding me? I don't let my kids go to Chick-fil-A, but I'm buying all these fruits and vegetables, and now there's one more thing for me to think about." Well, yes, but here's the thing, and this is what's I think really empowering, and at the same time gives you a little bit of relief from being too nervous about these things. It is a journey. There are still things that me and my wife and my whole family are still working on, and there always will be. You don't have to do it overnight. There's a couple steps you can take immediately to make huge transformations, and then slowly do the best that you can. That's all that we can ask. I mean, we are fighting a system, one of the most powerful, the multinational modern food system right now is so incredibly powerful. And we are fighting. I wouldn't say it's a losing battle, but it is an uphill battle. There's a ton of work to be done, a ton of things to relearn, a ton of approaches to take, a ton of legislation that has to happen. There's so many things that have to happen to create this incredibly safe, nourishing, efficient, and ethical and sustainable food system. A ton. But even small incremental steps can make huge differences. And the other thing I think is really important to understand, and this is one of the things that I really tried to make a huge part of this book, is it doesn't mean you have to give up the foods that you enjoy and all of a sudden sit there and eat crickets and bone marrow every day. Although I will tell you, both of them are delicious. My wife and I, it's a quick little side note, but I'll circle it back around, I promise. My wife and I realized that we are passionate about education, research and education. It's one of the reasons that I wrote the book. We do a lot of classes here. We do a lot of online classes. All of that's incredibly important. But we also realize that just creating the food and making it available to the community is very important. So we launched July 1, the Modern Stone Age Kitchen here in Chestertown, Maryland, where we're actually making that book come to life, and we're creating the food in the right ways, in using these traditional ancestral methods, and we're creating it, right here. In fact, I'm on the second floor, so it's happening right under my feet now. And it's not crickets and bone marrow. Again, we serve both of those, but we do taco night on Thursday nights, and we import maize from Oaxaca. We nixtamalize it. We stone grind it. We make the tortillas. We make all the cheese. Traditionally, we make all the meats. We do all of that. And here people are coming in and getting tacos. Everybody knows what a taco is, but it's the most nourishing form of a taco. We do pizza nights on Friday nights where we make all the pepperoni. We make all the cheese, sourdough crust. And all of a sudden, a food that we would think of as an American comfort, maybe some people consider junk food, and a lot of it is now a nourishing meal. I would never tell anybody who doesn't eat bread to start eating bread. But if you do eat bread, the safest, most nourishing, in my mind, or from my point of view, the most delicious form of bread is a traditional, wild, long, slow fermented sourdough bread, which we have here as well. So it's not like you're going to try to take, to take the kind of steps I'm talking about. You're not taking your kids and like just feeding them this weird crazy thing that they would reject. The idea is if you're making the changes that are going to be long lasting for lifetime changes, then they have to taste good. They have to look good. They have to be somewhat familiar whenever possible. And that can be done. There's a couple of quick changes that I always suggest that are very relatively easy, that can be overnight ones. Number one is get rid of every single industrial nut and seed oil in your house. Go into your cupboard, take them and throw them out. And don't worry, it is not, you're not wasting food, because it's not food. It's actually, if you don't want to throw it out, put it in your garage where it belongs, and it's there to lubricate, machinery or something like that. So get that, get that over there.
But it says vegetable oils. I thought it came from vegetables.
Well, that doesn't mean it's supposed to go in your body. So get rid of all that. Reject and reject refined sugars. It doesn't mean you can't ever eat anything sweet again, right? We all do. We find pleasure in eating things that are sweet. But listen, there's no biological need for sugar in the human body whatsoever. But there is an emotional and cultural need for it. And we have to recognize that. If you're going to consume sugar, in my mind, you might as well get something good from it as well. So maple syrup, raw, unprocessed, high-grade honey, or even there's a few completely unrefined sugars like muscovado, which I think have incredible flavors, but also bring with it things like valuable minerals. So, those are some very easy changes. It's not saying to your kids never eat sweets again. It's, hey, let's take it from this approach, and at least you're getting something good from it. Get rid of all ultra pasteurized dairy in your house. Never buy it again, and regard skim milk for what it is. I mean, it's colored water. Get rid of that as well. So, whole milk, non-homogenized, and if you're in a place you can have access to safe raw milk, certainly do that. And whenever possible, dairy should be fermented. I mean, there's a couple of very basic things like that if you they're literally overnight changes you can create that change, just by what you're purchasing at the grocery store. Those are very, very powerful. And you might not see a difference tomorrow, but you'll see a difference in a month. And think about if you do it now with whatever age your kids are, 5, 10, 15 years of eating that way is going to make a tremendous impact on their health.
I love that. Yeah, man. I grew up on skim milk and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I could never figure out why I would be asleep at first period and sleeping after lunch all the time. Couldn't pay attention. Weird. So strange. You use the word empowerment, which I really love. And that's something that really stood out from our conversation we had last year, where you said, just take one step closer to your food source. And that really stuck with me. And, nutrition is something that I pay attention to quite a bit. But there was a situation last year, I recall, where it was sometime in the afternoon, and my wife Bethany wasn't feeling that great, and we decided to make chicken soup. And I grabbed a rotisserie chicken from the store, but I was able to take all the meat off of that, and I was able to throw the carcass into a bunch of water in the Instant Pot. So I had real broth within, an hour, 2 hours, and then all the chicken meat went back in, and it was great. It was so tasty and nourishing and delicious. Helped Bethany feel better. And that's not the best meal ever. That's not organic, pasteurized, chicken that I harvested myself. But that was a great example of something that's pretty simple. It didn't take a lot of work, and it was taking one step closer to the food source.
100%. And you brought home an entire animal. You saw the shape of it. There's so many things some of them are direct nutritional benefits of the approach you just took, and some of them are a little bit harder to put your finger on, but again, are equally as powerful. And yes, listen, we shouldn't get caught up in labels on things and organic and we can list all those different. Now they're important. Don't get me wrong, but they shouldn't be a barrier. They shouldn't be the thing that stops you from accessing something that's a little bit more nourishing than what you already have access to. In an ideal world, in hyper seasonal, incredibly local, grass-fed, on that whole list of these labels we give, actually what real food always was. There's a whole host of these things. If you don't have access to it today because it's actually not in your grocery store, or because there's a financial barrier for you to access them all the time, or whatever that barrier is, that doesn't mean you can't make bone broth out of the rotisserie chicken from Acme. And it's a hell of a lot better than any bone broth you would buy in a box or in a can. And you did it yourself, and it's also cheaper. So we work towards have these very, very lofty goals, certainly, but work towards it and realize that, listen, a hamburger from Five Guys without the bun and without that nasty American cheese is 1,000 times better than eating, something else that you can, eating a hot dog from there or eating another fast food sort of thing. And you know what? Do it, eat it, don't feel guilty about it, and then move on. And hopefully one day you're going to be serving you and your family, organic grass-fed beef hamburgers that you ground yourself because you butchered the cow. But in the meantime, eat that. There's a couple choices you can make at Five Guys to make it 1,000 times healthier than the last time you eat somewhere like that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I even found online for one of my clients who's going to be traveling with his family. His family loves Olive Garden. We found a few okay kind of sort of options at Olive Garden that he could eat. So it is possible. And I really love that you use the word empowerment. I think that is very empowering for anybody. Anybody could just make their food a little bit better. We've mentioned technology. We've mentioned, the toxicity of plants. And we've also mentioned preparing plants and what an amazing ability humans have to be able to transform the food outside of the body before we put it inside of the body. Can we go into a little bit more detail on different ways that we can make foods safe and nourishing, like you said?
Absolutely. And again, now I want to make sure I do this. Empowerment is the goal of all of this, and not to make things any more stressful. But I will say it does get a little bit complicated at the beginning of this. But the reality is, once you dive in and start working with some of these things, it becomes a lot more simple. There are let's look at a plant, for example, and think about how a plant grows, what it's there to do, and what we need to watch out for and how we approach it should become very, very clear, hopefully very quickly. The first thing we need to, and then we could talk specifically about detoxification. Specifically, the first thing we need to, again, the first two things we need to recognize is that, and we already said one of them, all plants have some toxin in them. And number two, even though many plants have a lot of valuable nutrition, it's not very easy for our bodies to have access to that nutrition without a little bit of extra help. And in other words, just eating plants without thinking about them, without doing anything to them, can A, make you sick because of the toxins, and B, use your digestive tract as a highway. And a lot of the nutrition you're taking in just ends up coming out the other end, not going to where it needs to go in your body. That's if we're just eating plants without thinking, without doing anything to help it. Now, if we approach those plants with some respect and some fundamental understanding about how to make plants safe and their nutrients in them more accessible to our bodies, then we're really getting somewhere. So let's look at the plant, for example, very quickly. So we eat different parts of plants. We eat roots of certain plants, especially high starch, carbohydrate, underground storage organ plants, things like potatoes, for example. We eat the shoots of certain plants, right? The young shoots that first come out in the spring, things like asparagus. We eat leaves of certain plants, obviously like lettuce or spinach. We eat the seeds of certain plants. And when I say seeds, I'll lump everything in together: nuts, legumes or beans, right? Grains, seeds, all of those are the same kind of part of a plant. It's a reproductive part of the plant, right? And then we eat things like fruits, which the seeds are normally encased in. Now, if you think about a plant, and a plant that's engaging in chemical warfare with the outside world, what they're trying to do is some of those chemicals they're producing, we call them allelochemicals, some of them attract and some of them repel. So they want, first off, I do want to say, I teach foraging classes. I've taught foraging classes for 30 years, wild plants. I will never use an absolute in the plant world, right? Because it gets very dangerous. You're immediately wrong if you say all plants do this or no plants do this. So what I'm about to say is not 1,000% across the board, but it's a general way to think about these things. For the most part, fairly safe parts of plants are things like flowers and fruits, because for the most part, they're there to attract. Flowers are pretty, they have great colors, they smell good, they taste good because they're attracting things like pollinators to help make sure that plant survives and reproduces properly. Fruits are there to attract, they look pretty, they smell pretty, they taste delicious, because the role of the fruit is to get eaten by an animal who eats it, lives through that process, and then poops out the seeds somewhere else in a pile of manure so that seed can then germinate and produce new life. That makes complete sense. So fairly regularly, right, flowers and fruits are very have no toxins or very little toxins, especially when they're at full flower or when the fruits are perfectly ripe. On the other hand, a plant that has its stem eaten early or its leaves eaten and can't go through photosynthesis, there's or the root, the powerhouse, the storage house of all the energy for that plant, like a potato, it doesn't want that to get destroyed. So we can often find a lot of toxins in those places. And what's incredibly important for everybody to understand, the seeds of the plant, the grains, the nuts, the beans, all of those things are there. They are designed through evolutionary processes to physically pass through your digestive tract and to chemically pass through your digestive tract. Not only yours, but animals in general, right? So if you look at the shape of them, they're actually shaped to go in your mouth and come out the other end. Like they are designed that way. And they're loaded with anti-nutrients and other toxins that keep it dormant, so that when it's in the right environment, it can then let down its defenses and sprout and produce new life. So when we think about it that way, nuts, seeds, legumes, grains, those sorts of things always require processing, period. Always require processing. Fruits typically don't require, we have to think about things with fruits, but they're typically not at a level of toxicity we need to really worry about. Same thing with flowers. And then with stems and leaves and things, we should, it depends on the plant and the time of year and a couple of other things, whether or not we really need to do a lot to it. But roots, corms, tubers, what we call underground storage organs, very often need to be detoxified as well. So what are some basic mechanisms for this? Well, as far as roots are concerned, there's a lot we can do to them, and it's the basis of a much larger discussion here, but I'll give one quick takeaway. And all of this just makes sense if you think about it from a 40,000 foot view and understand what a plant is really trying to do. A plant isn't there to feed us. A plant is there to reproduce viable offspring. The storehouse of these plants that we harvest their underground storage organs from, again, think potato, is the most important part of that plant. It is there that the plant, when the top of the plant dies off in the winter, that plant is living under the ground there, and then the next year would send up a shoot. That needs to be protected, and most of the toxins in underground storage organs are present in the far majority are present in the skins. And I know I grew just like you, Casey. I grew up thinking the skin is all these vitamins and minerals, all these wonderful things are in the skin, and there is nutrition in the skin of a potato. The problem is that it is not worth it. It is not worth it. Always peel a potato and get rid of the skins. Don't try to use it for something else, and don't try to put it in a stock or whatever. Always peel the potatoes. That is probably the easiest way to start to make a very quick change right away. I used to leave the skin on carrots. I used to leave the skin on a lot of different things. Anything that's in the ground now, we always peel. And not because of it may be unsightly or whatever else. It's because of that's the barrier. That's where the plant is producing toxins, so that it's keeping away fungus and keeping away insects and keeping away other predators. So we always peel. There's other things we can do as well, but that's the number one there. As far as nuts, seeds, and legumes and beans and grains and all those things go, well, there's a lot of issues with them, a ton. There's several different ways to deal with them depending on the grain or legume or nut or whatever it is. But I'll give a couple of quick things. Number one, if what we're trying to do is trick that seed or nut or legume, whatever it is, into letting down its defenses, then we put it in the environment in which it naturally would happen. And that is soaking or sprouting or fermenting. I mean, if you think about when you plant a seed into the ground, it's a warm, moist environment. And when it's there, that's when those things can happen. So, there's, again, a lot of things we can do in a lot of cases, but soaking, sprouting, and or fermenting are the powerful ways to deal with grains. Again, I'll give you one very quick example of something we may not realize, but it's incredibly important. One of the most dangerous things in a grocery store is a dried kidney bean. I mean, red kidney beans are so incredibly toxic that just 3 or 4 of them raw will land you in the hospital.
Wow.
Make you very, very sick. Red kidney beans need to be both soaked and cooked to detoxify them. And when you mentioned the Instapot earlier, one thing that's problematic is that, I love my Instapot. I use it for a lot of different things. But one of the things that people suggest about using a pressure cooker is that with beans, you don't have to soak them overnight any longer. And so anybody who hasn't prepared beans, you take the dried beans, you soak them overnight, preferably in an alkaline solution. We talk about this in the book. And then the next day, we cook them, and then they're soft, and then we eat them either as beans or make refried beans or whatever we're going to do with them. But with a pressure cooker, you can, people say you can skip the soaking step because a pressure cooker is powerful enough to make that dried bean be mushy enough to be able to eat it at the end of the cooking process without having soaked it. And even though physically it might be prepared for consumption, chemically it's not. It needs the combination of soaking and cooking in order to be as safe as possible for us to consume.
Dude, that was an absolute clinic. That was so very well explained. I really appreciate all of that and the level of detail you went to on that. It's work. It takes a little bit of time. You're right. It is rewarding. If you do it, you need to take it on. There's steps in the process that you need to involve. What if I wanted to skip all of that? What foods are already generally so safe that I don't need to mess with fermenting and sprouting and all that other stuff?
Well, the first thing that I would do, number one, across the board, whether you're doing all these steps or not doing all these steps, is by default just eating seasonally. I mean, if you eat seasonally, then you've eliminated a whole host of potential problems that you can get by overeating the same food all the time, like spinach, for example. So if you do that, now I don't mean eating seasonally like, okay, well, this farm in my area has a hoop house, so now they can produce spinach 6-7 months out of the year because they have this heated, whatever. Like, that's not seasonal. I mean, eating seasonally that, this would grow outside where you live this time of year. And, that helps a ton. And that doesn't mean if you really love asparagus and you want to put it on the table for a special event, I'm not suggesting that you're going to die. But what I'm saying is, if you like asparagus, don't eat it 340 days out of the year. It just doesn't make sense on a lot of different levels. So eating seasonally certainly helps a lot. Again, fruits and flowers are usually very, very safe because of the reason I mentioned before. And then beyond that, one of the things I would really suggest is paying attention to oxalates. And I know you had Sally Norton on. The problem with oxalates is that I have not found, and it's one of the things I'm literally searching all the corners of the planet to try to figure out how our ancestors detoxified oxalates, got oxalates out of their foods, and I haven't found an incredibly powerful one yet.
Wow.
Some fermenting, there's some suggestions, some studies that suggest that some fermenting can help. Co-cooking certain high oxalate containing plants with dairy seems to help a little. So, one of the problems with oxalates is that when you consume it, it will rob your body of calcium because the calcium binds with the oxalates, form calcium oxalates. If you cook it with dairy, cream or milk, or even cheese, some of that binding supposedly will take place before you consume it. So it will help a little bit with at least the loss of calcium in your body. So if you're going to cook spinach, cream spinach is a really good choice, for example. But for the most part, if you look at, and Sally Norton has a ton of information, but even if you just Google oxalates and food and charts, you'll come up with a whole list of foods that, it's not even worth exploring how to detoxify them because you shouldn't have a whole lot of them in your bodies anyhow. Things like, and I'm sure you went over with Sally, but things like spinach or almonds or beets or those sorts of foods. And I know, again, oh my gosh, we're talking about foods that are touted as superfoods or incredibly healthy foods. Even if they have good nutrition in them, which they do, it is not worth it to consume them in high amounts because you will pay the price for it.
That was also incredibly helpful. I really appreciate that. When we started our business, we got our logo done and that was really cool, but it was the day that the a delivery of stickers came, and I had a sticker that I could put in my hand that had our logo on it. I thought that was so cool to have something to hold in my hand. You have been working your entire career in discovering the best way for a human to eat, and I'll never forget the picture of you on social media. You always look happy, but that was the biggest smile I've ever seen you have holding your actual book. What did it mean to you to get to the process of finally being able to hold the book you've been working on for your entire life?
I don't even, there isn't words for it. And the fact that the whole family was there, we took the box came from the publisher and we got to open the book. It was truly overwhelming. And, my wife teared up, and I didn't have a tear running down my face, but I did certainly inside. It was amazing. And I will say I had so much, the acknowledgement section, if you get the book, the two most important parts of the book, if you're going to get the book, and just not really maybe read the whole thing, I suggest you read the whole thing. But if you're just going to skim or look, do me a favor. There's two parts that I think are huge, are the most important parts. Number one, the conclusion at the very end. It could have been an introduction. There's no problem reading that first, and that I spent a lot of time on that because I wanted to make sure the takeaway message there was powerful and empowering, but also the acknowledgments. The acknowledgments are at the end. That's where they put them, probably because they're so long. And this is a culmination of a lifetime journey that had so many incredible people help me through it. And whether it was professors or teachers or family members or mentors or even some of the families and incredible people, the traditional and indigenous groups that we lived and worked with around the world, that I just want to say, this is the product of not only years of me and my family's work, but the help of a whole lot of incredible humans around the planet.
I love that. That's amazing. What does it mean to you to be able to share your message in the community? We know you're doing the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. You've got the book now, trained as a chef. How important is it to you to bring this message out to people?
It's so rewarding. My wife and I were just talking about it this morning. We have people coming through the door happy. Just happy. We are surrounded by just happy people. And Thursdays, we have the shop open here several days a week, but on Thursday afternoons, my wife and I, and sometimes our oldest daughter, Brianna, who actually started the sourdough business, go down to the Ken Island Farmers Market, and we have a stand there. And we look forward to it every week. Number one, my wife and I are there, and we're not running around like crazy people like we do the rest of the week, but it's also just we get to see the same people every week, and who just had a baby, and whose family, whose son just came home from college, and they're taking away, we're meeting them, we're seeing them, we're engaging with them, which is great. And then they're taking our food back home to nourish their families. There's a part, it's one of the most rewarding things of our life. There's a section in the chapter on insects where we were in Thailand, where I'm talking about one of the huge markets we were in Bangkok, and we were there to do some work on. I really wanted to understand insect consumption at that level, and how they're sold, and how they're prepared, and how they're consumed, and all of those different things. And we're at this one open market, and my gosh, it was amazing. Talk about removing links from your food chain. We're walking in there, and there are just cages of chickens and baskets of frogs and all these things right there. The people that raise them are standing there. Are the only thing standing between you and that food is the actual person who raised it. You pick what you want out. They take it out. They actually kill it and butcher it in front of you and hand it to you. Wow. Some people might think I think it's powerful. My gosh, it's so. But to me, that's the safest food system possible. But the part that struck me as I'm watching all this happening is, here's the consumer not only directly talking to and seeing the person that raised, and in this case raised and slaughtered and butchered their food, but as they're handing them the money and taking the bag with them, their hands inadvertently touch. They just do. You do. When you grab $1 out of somebody's hand or grab a bag out of somebody's hand, your hands touch. There's literally, physically, it's such a small, intimate, powerful food system. And what I love is that, the food that we're preparing for people, my hands or the people working with us have touched 30, 40, 50 times. And then I'm putting it in a package, or somebody's putting it in a pack, and we're handing it to the customers. And, our hands are touching, and I don't mean it to sound creepy. I mean it to sound human. I mean, this is the way the food system should be. And it's just rewarding. There really aren't the right words to describe it.
I love that, man. That's so cool. I think that's so important to have that physical touch and that intimacy with our food system. And like you said earlier, just take a step, get a little closer to your food. That can be a really empowering message. What are you working on for the future?
We are working on, we have a ton of ideas for a second book, and we're getting feedback from people now, which is really, really valuable. So we're working on planting the seeds for what that's going to be. We have some ideas. We're expanding our offerings here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. In fact, I just literally seconds before you and I got on for this, I was jarring up a whole bunch of bone broth. We're going to start doing a whole lot of work with bone broth and fermented vegetables, and making those things available as well. And I'm really proud to say I just started doing some consulting work with Compass Ireland, which is a food. Compass is one of the larger, and it's actually a larger worldwide food supplier that would supply food in places like Google, for example, for the workers, or bases, or educational institutions, or that sort of thing. And you would think that somebody with my approach to all of this would run away from an organization like that, but I have to tell you, we're trying everything that we can to make as many changes in the food system as possible. And I will give Compass a ton of credit. Compass Ireland just broke off from Compass UK, and the new person that's running it is incredibly huge visionary. And she brought me an amazing chef, Michelin star chef, Kevin Thornton, who's Irish, and then their head chef from Compass. Together, we had a several-day retreat about a month and a half ago, and to create their food vision, and which is a template now for all of their menu planning and all of their education and all of their purchasing decisions. So they supply food to tens of thousands of people, and right now we're planning a 3-year training program for all of their chefs. And we're able to make it. Certainly, I wish they were doing nothing but fermented raw dairy and all these other sorts of things. But we're making changes. We're making changes that are impacting tens of thousands of people, and I'm incredibly proud of that.
That is awesome. I absolutely love to hear that. Dr. Bill Schindler, this has been such a fun conversation. Your work is absolutely incredible. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Great. So there's 2 places. So on social media, you can find me directly at Dr. Bill Schindler, so at Dr. Bill Schindler. And the Modern Stone Age Kitchen is on social media as well at Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And the same thing for websites. My personal website is at eatlikeahuman.com, and the Modern Stone Age Kitchen is modernstoneagekitchen.com.
That is awesome. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Dr. Bill Schindler, author of the wonderful book, Eat Like a Human. Thank you so very much for all of your work, your entire career. Thank you for all the work you put into the book and for serving the community. It's such an honor to talk to you, and be able to talk to you again is so valuable for me personally, and will be for our audience as well. So thank you again so very much for everything that you do.
Well, thank you so much. And likewise, I love the work that you're doing, and I love to support it. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks, man. I need to just give my condolences at the time of this release. Hopefully my beloved Utah Utes would have fully dismantled Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, destroyed your Buckeyes. I'm going to make that claim right here, right now. You heard it here first.
Well done. Well done.
Well, thanks again, man. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Likewise.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.